Welcome back to What the Fertility Season 3. We are shaking some things up as we finish up Season 3 and move into Season 4. One of those things being solo intros. So typically what we do is we record everything with the guest on, and it hasn't given us the ability to remind you guys to subscribe to the show. If you like what you hear, if you have 60 seconds, if you want to support us, please scroll down to the bottom of whatever app you are listening to this on. Give us a star rating, preferably 5-star rating, a quick review. It really helps the podcast. And we are moving into year 4. So the more that we can get support on this platform, the more we will be able to continue to produce. So those are some quick housekeeping items, but most importantly, we chose to do this or start this solo intro with this episode because I totally messed up when I was sharing. So we will have Gina, our dear friend, on here in a minute. And when I did her intro, I, for some reason, said that she had failed IVF cycles. She has not actually done an IVF transfer yet. And that's really not even at all what her story today is about. But wanted to clarify that and thought this would be a great time to do so. Um, Other things before we get started, we have 2 new partners that we're working with. Mira Fertility, we have a new code for 17% off. It is WTF Pod 17, and that is a link in our bio. We also have a new code for We Natal. It is a free fish oil supplement with a subscription of their We Natal vitamins. So their prenatal vitamins, they have options for both women and men. So I think that's really cool. My husband and I are using those. And then we have another really fun partnership coming up. Amanda is actually going to utilize it for her IVF transfer. So I will hold on that one. It is likely that you will see the affiliation in our bio on our Instagram, but until then, I will let Amanda share more about that. So let's get into today's episode. Welcome back to What the Fertility Season 3. This morning, we have an absolute gem of a guest on with us. Gina is joining us all the way from San Diego, where it is 6 a.m. her time. So a massive thank you for just showing up and continuing to honor your story and your walk through motherhood. Gina's story started long before the birth of her daughter, Remy, who we want to dedicate this entire episode to. Gina and her husband have not only walked through the loss of their daughter, but are now continuing to navigate failed IVF cycles and a new diagnoses such as APS and endometriosis. Gina, it is an absolute honor to have you on the show with us this morning, and we just have the utmost respect for you for coming on and sharing all of the ups and downs of your journey. So welcome and thank you.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here with you guys. You're going to make me cry first thing in the morning.
I know, 6 a.m. Well, as we said in the intro, I don't love the word trigger warning, but we are going to be talking about premature or preterm birth,
Mhm.
infant loss, IVF, miscarriage, all the things that we do talk about on this episode. And I do, Gina, think you're the first mom to come on and really talk about, infant loss. So huge thanks to you. And Remy still shows up every day in my life. I text Gina all the time and say, I see the bunnies when I run every morning. So this is just a full circle moment for you and I and Amanda as we've watched you walk this really long journey.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. And yeah, thank you guys for creating this platform to be able to come and share all of our unique journeys and all of our unique stories. And I think, yeah, as we talked about before, that's something that's really important to this piece of our journeys.
Yeah, and so you and I connected. I remember I was thinking about this. I feel like we connected before you even had your first pregnancy. Is that right? Or was it like you were like, I feel like this might happen to me, or had you had a miscarriage and then we connected?
I have never had a miscarriage. Remy was actually my first and only pregnancy. So I've never had a miscarriage. I know you and I connected several years back, but I just cannot for the life of me remember what brought us together. And
I
I was
think
trying to remember, I cannot.
I swear, I think you were just like so intrigued by everything, and you and I we work in the same career, and we had like some kind of cross paths before. But I really feel like we'll have to go back in the DMs. But I feel like you were just like, I want to learn everything and anything so that when I do get pregnant, I can kind of like know what to look for. And you and your husband got pregnant. I mean, what, like a year into marriage? Is that right?
Yeah, so we actually got pregnant pretty quickly, and it's kind of coming back to me now. Like, I remember in a previous episode, you had said that you and Amanda connected because you saw like the tribute that she had posted about Shiloh or something like that. And you had not experienced anything like that yourself yet, but you just like kind of felt a calling. It was like kind of the same for me, and I can't explain it. Like, it's the strangest thing, but I have always worked in the women's health field. Like, I've always been really passionate advocate for women's health, and I think it was just like, I don't know, sometimes your body knows.
Yeah.
Um, but my husband and I got married. We delayed our wedding a little bit because we got married in the middle of COVID. It was 20, so we got married in December 2021. And several months before our wedding, I actually started seeing like irregularities in my cycle that prompted me to see an OBGYN. And I'd always had like textbook 28-day cycles. And all of a sudden, from 1 month to the next, it just became completely irregular overnight. And I remember like this was the summer, we were doing a lot of hiking. Like, we were in Yosemite hiking like 50, 60 miles a week. Like, we did half to, it was crazy. So I was like, maybe it's because, I'm being a little bit more active than usual, that my cycles are off. All of the OBGYNs that I went to were like, no, like everything's fine on blood work. And finally, I think this was like the third one that I went to. And similar to you, Kat, like I work in the field, so I just have like a lot of access to, I mean, most people probably wouldn't do blood work as much as I did. I
Right,
was a
same.
little psycho about it. But one of the OBGYNs that I finally did blood work with, she was like, your AMH is really low. Um, I was, how old was I? I think I was like 27 years old at the time, and maybe even 26. And my AMH was like zero point 0.9, which, I'm sure you guys know all about that. And that was the first time that I had heard that any of my numbers looked low. Um, and they said this could just be your body's normal. It could be caused by a multitude of things like, an autoimmune disease, so we need to do more investigation. So they were actually referred me to an RE. I was like on birth control at the time, and we weren't even trying because we weren't, we wanted to wait until after our wedding. So our story is really unique in that we saw an RE before we even started trying to get a diagnosis for me. And it wasn't just the low AMH, it wasn't just the regular cycles, it was the two combined. They were worried that I was, essentially going into premature menopause. Um, yeah. So that's kind of how we
That
started our
I feel like
RE journey.
now it's coming back to me. That's why we connected because again, you hadn't started trying, but you were just like loaded up with all this information, and you were like, okay, like I know I'm gonna potentially struggle when we do try to start conceiving. And then you guys finally got married, which was a stunning wedding,
Mhm.
and then to your point, you guys got pregnant pretty quick after you got married.
Yeah, so they told us, since we were established with an RE clinic already, they said we can monitor you. You guys have never tried before. Actually, let me back up. That initial RE that we were with, which who we are no longer with now, but they just simply looked at my lab results, my low AMH, and my AMH had dropped again within that like 6 months between us getting married and us ready to start trying. It had dropped again to like zero point 0.8 or zero point 0.7 or something like that. So based off of that, that RE was like, if you were, my sister, my daughter, whatever, I would recommend that you guys go into IVF right away. And my husband and I, Garrett and I, kind of talked about it, and we were like, we've never even had a chance to try before. And with our family building goals, like we were fine with, just having one child. And so we were just like, let's not do IVF. I mean, it's like 30 to 40 $1,000. It's a huge commitment. Let's try on our own. Let's give ourselves 3 months and see what happens from there. So we gave ourselves 3 months, and the third and final month, I got pregnant with
Oh
Remy.
my goodness.
Yeah, so it truly was like this out of body. I mean, yeah, it was wild. The timing, it was
Right,
just, it worked out.
Which is
right.
incredible because of how low your AMH was. That they're probably the RE was probably like, wait, what? You got pregnant on your own? Like,
I
yeah.
know. Yeah, I don't think anyone thought it would actually happen. Like
Yeah,
we were
sure.
almost convinced after that, second month and the third month of trying. And like that was the first time I had used like OPKs. Like I had kind of been tracking my temperature and stuff like that before for like different ovulation methods or like fertility tracking, but I'd never really like been on top of it. So I will say like the first month or two, I think our timing was like completely off. We were just like having sex at random points during my cycle.
Oh, that's so wild. And so I remember you get pregnant with Remy and it was kind of a roller coaster of a pregnancy, right? Like you kept having it wasn't just a straightforward like 9 months.
It was not, it was like the complete opposite of straightforward. And again, this was one of those things where, like, from the very beginning, I just had this deep rooted anxiety and I couldn't put a finger on it. Like, everyone was telling me, like, I mean, my poor husband, he was like, everything's fine. Like, we're going to the doctor. We literally have an RE when most people don't even have an RE at this stage. Like, we have all of these different specialists who have done like loads and loads of blood work on you. Everything is coming back normal. Like your progesterone levels are rising appropriately, betas are rising. Like nothing was really wrong, except I just like had this deep feeling that something was going to go wrong. And it's just, it's unexplained. Like, I think it was just intuition.
Hmm.
Um, But because I was with an RE, as soon as I got my positive home pregnancy test, and I think I like texted it to you, Kat, and I was like, "Is this positive?" And you're like, "Dude, that's like really freaking
Yeah.
positive."
Yeah. And okay, for listeners and even for me, what year did you got pregnant in 2021? Gosh,
2022. I got pregnant in
2022.
July, like July, August of 2022.
Okay. Okay. So yeah,
Yeah,
you were very pregnant with your
yeah.
home test.
You're like, "What's wrong with you?" That is
Yeah.
that is a
Like, well,
complete
that's what
lie.
I'm going. I'm
Why?
like, yeah, I'm going back and I'm thinking we talked so much during those 9 months, and I feel like you just had these like crazy things happen, and then all the time it was like, but it's okay. Like it's okay. So, okay, starting with
Yeah.
the positive pregnancy test, did you do betas?
I did betas because I was with an RE. Like I was like, I called them. I think I got my positive on like my home positive on a Thursday or something like that. And they were like, okay, come in Monday and we'll draw your betas. They drew my betas. I asked for my progesterone to be drawn, so they did that also. And my betas were really low. My first beta, I think, was 18. And my progesterone was like a 6. And this was roughly around like somewhere between 14 and 16 days post the ovulation that I had tracked at home. And my RE was, she was honest with me and she said, if your cycle is where you said, it should be, which it should be because we've been like monitoring you and you've been tracking at home. So I can't imagine that it would be, off. I'm concerned that this is going to be a chemical pregnancy. And I had to fight to get some progesterone prescribed to me. It was an uphill battle. And she was like, you shouldn't even have gotten pregnant with a progesterone that low. Like, I don't know what's going on. So they prescribed me progesterone. I started taking it that day. Came back 2 days later and betas had doubled. And so it was this like, I mean, you guys know it was beta hell for the next week and a half. I went back, I think, 3 or 4 times until my betas finally like reached like 600 or something. And at that point, they were like, "Okay, we're just gonna treat this as a legitimate pregnancy. Come back in a couple weeks to see if we can see the fetal pool and all of that." Um, so yeah, that was the
That
very
was the first
beginning of
one.
that
Yeah.
pregnancy.
And that yeah, that makes sense because I remember you were like, this is going to be a chemical. And then you're like, oh, actually, we had our first ultrasound. So
Good.
yeah, so what's the what's the next step?
What happened next?
Yeah, so we graduated from the fertility clinic, I think 7 or 8 weeks, and then I joined like a or I guess I had my first like midwife appointment scheduled for around 9 or 10 weeks, and so we had that 2 week gap where we weren't having any monitoring. And initially, I wasn't like too worried about it, but then I had this massive bleed, and I have never, so it was a subchorionic hematoma. Everything was fine, but that happened right at 9 weeks, like on the dot. I just felt, this really sharp cramp. I think it was like a Saturday. Of course, it's the weekend. And I just started, bleeding. And I don't know if either of you guys have had
Yeah,
that
I
with
have
your
that.
pregnancy. I think it's more common in IVF pregnancies too because of the blood thinners that you're on. It was the scariest thing. And I was like, why did no one prep me for this? Because it's so
100%.
common.
Yeah.
It's so common. It's the weekend. I'm like, do I go to the emergency room? Am I miscarrying right now? Um, so I had that bleed at 9 weeks. I had another massive bleed at 12 weeks from the same hematoma. And then after that, it just kind of resolved itself. But for my entire pregnancy, from 9 weeks moving forward, I was either always on pelvic rest or bed rest. And it was completely miserable because yeah, your mindset changes completely. Like I could no longer move my body in the way that I wanted to move my body. I started putting on weight. And so I was just like anxious and like starting to feel depressed about that all the time. Um, I don't know if we can like talk about this, but they put me on pelvic rest. So they were like, don't have sex, like didn't have sex for
Yeah.
like the entire 6 or 7 months. I literally think I like got pregnant and then like never had sex again
Yeah.
until after
Yeah.
Remy was born.
Wow. Oh
And
my
so
God.
that just like changes your not changes your relationship, but it's a difficult thing to like navigate,
Well,
Sure.
and for,
with your partner.
yeah, and for your partner too, because I know I was sick as well, not to that extent, but like then your partner's like living in this house with you and you're like sick. Like
Yeah.
you're not you for a very long time. Um, okay. So I mean, 12 weeks to so then you have is the next really diagnosis type thing at the anatomy scan?
Yeah, so right before the anatomy scan, because I had the subchorionic hematomas, I asked for an additional scan to make sure it had resolved completely. So I went in around 15 weeks for a scan, and they did like almost a full anatomy scan at that point where they like measured everything on the baby and all of that. And at the time of the appointment, I was told that everything looked good and that the hematoma had resolved. So we were really happy about that news. Looking back at my records, starting at like 9 or 10 weeks, there was a steady decrease in like the size of the baby. Like she was already falling off of the growth curve at that point, and it just wasn't caught. And I don't know why it wasn't caught. I don't know if it's because I went to different offices to get each of these like I was still within the same health system, but I was going from my midwife clinic to this like probably like it wasn't MFM, but just, um like a different ultrasound center to get the other scan done. So she had steadily been falling from like the 50th percentile, and then she was down to the 40th percentile. At that 15-week scan, she was already at the 22nd percentile. And then came our anatomy scan, which I think I was right around 20 weeks when we had that done. And I have seen enough of those to know how long an anatomy scan should take. And ours was just so long. And I just knew that something was wrong. Um, and I like remember laying there and my husband's like all excited. And I'm like, I just like can't even say anything to him right now. So we waited until the doctor came in. And that was kind of when we were told she's measuring really small. She's under the first percentile at this point. We looked back at your chart and she has completely dropped off of her own growth curve, which now I know that they're not as concerned about the size of the baby as they are about the baby staying on their own growth curve. Um, but she had, obviously not started out at under 1%. So at that appointment, and looking back, I just felt a lot of anger around this appointment for such a long time because the way that we were counseled was not appropriate. The MFM came in and it was, we were at a teaching hospital. So it was actually a student, a resident who came in, and they told us, well, you have the option to terminate today if you want to. And that was the very first thing that they said to us.
What?
Um,
I
Oh
didn't know.
my gosh. What?
yeah. And I'm sitting there like, I mean, my husband and I are both sitting there in shock, and we're like, terminate? What are you talking about? Like, you just told us that our baby is measuring small, and there could be like several reasons why. Like, I know it could be like an infection. I know it could be like, I knew all the reasons why. And I was like, can you guys run these tests before counseling us on termination? Like, this seems like we just went from 0 to 500 like really quickly.
Yeah.
So, they did the counseling. We met with a genetic counselor, and because we had been established with an RE, we had already done, like, Garrett and I had already done our, what do you call it, like,
Stereotyping.
karyotyping.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we had already done that. We showed the results to the genetic counselor. Like, she went over family history and everything, and the tech had even said, the ultrasound tech was like, there's nothing like anatomically wrong with the baby. Everything looks great. Heart is great. Like, everything looks perfectly fine. So based off of that, we kind of ruled out anything genetic. Um, they said that they offered me an amnio, but I just declined at the time because I didn't feel like it was warranted. And
Mhm.
um, they tested me for all of the infections, all of the blood clotting issues, and we waited a week for those results to come back. And sure enough, that's when my APS levels came back
And so for
elevated.
and so for listeners, because I know what that is, but
No,
APS is
I need to know. What is that?
it's anti-phospholipid syndrome. Am I saying that right? And so
Yeah.
it's a blood, actually, Gina, why don't you tell people what it is?
Yeah, so it is a blood clotting disorder. It's when your body, gosh, I'm not even gonna like, I don't know if I'm gonna explain
But
this
well,
properly.
yeah, I mean, I'm like, why don't you say it? I mean, it basically just blood thinning and blood clotting is important when you're pregnant because the placenta and the baby, and that's how like the blood and the oxygen get and nutrients get to the baby. And so if you're more prone to antiphospholipid, it's just the clotting of, oh God, Gina, it's the it's blood clotting, and it can just cause we should know this.
I know. I'm like, what's wrong with me? I like know
But
what it
this
is,
word
but then
though,
to explain it,
this word comes up all the time with my lupus blood work. So like
Well,
I
it
see
that's
that
why,
does.
yeah, and so that's why I'm on Lovenox, Amanda. So like that's what
right.
Lovenox or heparin would do. Gina, were you? Well, I'll let you keep going.
Yeah, so essentially my blood was like too thick, like it was like clotting too much, to put it, in really simple
Mhm.
terms. And they explained to me, they said you could likely have this outside of pregnancy. So we'll test you again in 12, when you're not pregnant after you have the baby, and you have to wait like 8 to 12 weeks to get tested again to make sure it's a conclusive result. Or it could be what's called obstetric APS, and it's basically when your body recognizes the baby as a foreign object and it starts to attack the placenta.
I never knew that.
Um,
I literally
yeah.
never knew that. And so maybe, okay, so maybe for people that get on like the Lovenox and the heparin and they don't have the disorder, they actually do have it when they're pregnant. They're just not being tested. Interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's why, like, I was like curious about you too, Kat, because a lot of times, like, it's not until you're in your late first trimester, second trimester that these antibodies like kick, you're able to actually pick up the high levels in a blood test. So I think, with obstetric APS, it's really important that women who have this have an OB who's going to be willing to act proactively and have them on that dose of Lovenox even maybe before they are pregnant, like before that
Yeah.
cycle. Um, so yeah, so we started Lovenox injections right away. I was 21 weeks or so at that point. I was immediately, I was no longer with the midwife office at that point. They referred me to maternal fetal medicine. So I was with the high risk OBs, which is where we stayed until we delivered at 28 weeks and 3 days. Um, and they brought me in for scans every week starting from that point. And essentially, she was measuring small because my body was attacking her placenta. So she wasn't getting the adequate like blood flow and the nutrients and stuff, which is why she was measuring really small. And it's like the longer that pregnancy progressed, obviously the more clotting in the placenta and like the more challenging it is for the baby to keep up with their own growth curve. So we were monitored weekly, and I'll save you guys the details, but essentially they look with the Doppler to make sure that the blood flow is going to the baby and not being taken away from the baby. But with like really, bad clotting issues or placental issues, there comes a point in the pregnancy when the blood flow starts to go the opposite way. So instead of taking blood and nutrients to baby, it starts taking blood and nutrients away from baby and delivering waste products to the baby. I think I'm explaining that right.
Yeah.
And so they were basically monitoring me for that on a weekly basis. And we met with everyone, and we, try to figure out. I think I had already gotten a neonatology consult at that point. We had tried to figure out, like, okay, if we have to deliver tomorrow, what are our options? And we were told at that point, while she had met, this was around like 23, 24 weeks, while she had met technically the gestational age for a baby being able to be born and resuscitated in the NICU, because she was so small and she was measuring about 4 weeks behind, there was no chance of survival. So in our case, it really was like a touch and go. And they sent us home every week after the ultrasounds, and they basically said, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do for you. If she declines, or like she might, this might be a stillbirth situation, and you just have to monitor kicks, and there's just nothing we can do for you. So yeah, that's what we did. And every single week we went in there, and I mean, I could obviously feel her at that point. I was able to feel her first kick around 17 weeks, which now looking back is crazy because she was so small at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, every week we went in not knowing if we were going to hear a heartbeat, not knowing what we were going to be told on the ultrasound. And miraculously, this is like a complete miracle. Between weeks 27 and 28, she had a huge growth spurt, which I don't know how she managed to do that given the circumstances, but that put us in a deliverable weight range. And blood flow had actually gotten a little bit better between weeks 27 and 28. Or excuse me, like 26 and 27. And then when we went back for a 28-week scan, blood flow had completely reversed. And so at that point, they were like, we need to deliver her, or we need to at least like admit you to the hospital and get ready for delivery. So at that point, I was admitted into labor and delivery. They monitored me for 3 days. I was on a magnesium drip for 3 days, which I don't know if you guys have heard about that, but it's like the worst thing
I've
ever.
heard it's really tough, like on the mom, like it just makes you feel horrific, right?
Oh my gosh, I was like googly eyed. My like eyes were so low, like down here, like I couldn't. I mean, they had me. I wasn't able to eat anything. I wasn't allowed to drink water, and the magnesium makes you like really, really hot and thirsty. Um, but they do it because they want to protect the baby's brain in case of delivery, and in those premature babies, they're just like so fragile. Um, so I did that for 3 days. I did a course of steroid shots to help mature her lungs before delivery. And then she was born on February 3rd. We actually had a C-section scheduled for that afternoon, but she wanted to come early. Things took a little bit of a turn in the middle of the night. So she was born February 3rd. I had a C-section, which was like the scariest thing ever for me personally. I mean, I knew I was going to have a C-section, and I think just the emergency situation that it was just, yeah,
Yeah,
really
I
challenging.
remember like I remember those weeks so vividly. Like I remember exactly where I was when we were texting in the group chat. Like I remember, I mean, obviously you remember too. And then I remember waking up and you were like, Remy's here. And I was like, oh my gosh, why wasn't I awake?
Oh,
Especially with the time difference too. What time was she born?
2:18, I think the same time as
Oh,
Brooklyn.
yes, I was gonna say, wait, that's right.
Yeah.
They were born at the exact same time.
Yeah. It's so crazy.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So she was born and she was a fighter.
She came out screaming. She actually scored what is the APGAR out of? Is it out of 9?
Out of 10. Yeah, but they
Out of
don't think
10.
they've ever given a 10, ever.
I think she scored like an 8 or 9 out of the 10
At
on her APGAR
28
That's
weeks,
insane.
at
that's
28
wild.
weeks.
That's amazing.
Yeah. She was born 545. I think that's the correct change grams, which is like a pound and 4 ounces. She was teeny tiny. Like Garrett could like hold her in the palm of one hand. Um, it's actually funny. This is like totally off topic, but there's like ground turkey at Trader Joe's that's a pound and 4 ounces.
Oh my gosh.
So sometimes I'll like go shop at Trader Joe's and just like hold the ground turkey. People are like, "What is this lady doing?"
Oh my God. That's a whole podcast episode
That
too.
is,
I know.
honestly, it really is.
You
Yeah.
were the best. Oh my gosh. Okay. Okay, so she was born, and I remember you did y'all pick her name out like the day before or like the day
Well,
after?
yeah, so I thought she was going to be a boy from the very beginning. Like I had like boy dreams and stuff, so I was convinced she was going to be a boy. We actually weren't even supposed to find out her gender, but the lab accidentally released the results to us, which is, fine.
What a
But we
story.
had no girl names, and I just remember like we had a name picked out. My husband really liked Kendall, and I thought it was a cute name too. And then we saw her, and I just was like, she's not a Kendall. Like this just
Oh,
doesn't
she's
seem
Remy. Yeah.
to fit her. So yeah, we came up with Remy like I think like a couple days after she was born, so she didn't have a name for a couple days, but
I know. I remember we all
um
kept asking you, and you're like, I don't know yet.
yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, so she was born, and I actually had a classical C-section. I don't know if you guys have had any other guest on the show who has had this, but because she was so small, and she was like tucked up in the top left side of my uterus, and so the safest way to get her out was via classical. So instead of cutting the uterus horizontally, they had to do the incision vertically for me,
Oh,
which is a longer recovery time. And it also means that I can't labor in the future. So all my subsequent births will have to be C-sections because there's just a higher risk of, uterine rupture if women with that sort of incision are allowed to labor.
interesting. I've never
Yeah,
heard.
which was yeah, I had never heard of it either until, a couple of weeks before the birth. And it's pretty common in really preterm deliveries or emergency type C-sections. But yeah, they really don't try not to do them anymore. So that's a whole story on its own, like the birth trauma and all of that. But yeah, she did really well in the NICU overall. She ended up with a couple of like infections. She had trouble feeding, but she just kept like bouncing back from every challenge that was thrown her way. And eventually she ended up with necrotizing enterocolitis, which is, neck for short, NEC. And it's an infection of the bowels that can really affect premature babies or babies who have gut issues already that they're born with, or, anything like that, but mostly premature babies. And really, the only thing that has been proven to help is the baby receiving mother's milk. So whether that's breast milk that you've pumped yourself or you're getting breast milk through like a donor program at your hospital, that is really the only thing. There's not really much cure. There's not much prevention for it other than that, I should say. Um,
So,
so that's what,
yeah, because you've become a pretty big advocate. Like I've learned about it from you. Is that is NEC or neck, is that a hospital acquired infection, or it is just an infection based off of like where the baby's at that stage? That's just like they're just more prone to something like that.
yeah, I think it's complicated because it's I would probably say it's likely not a hospital acquired infection. I mean, the only thing that I can think of is if the baby has like a feeding tube and there's like sterilization issues there, just anything that can introduce bacteria into the gut or the digestive tract. But for the most part, it is just a really underdeveloped gut that's not able to
Process.
process bacteria in the way that, our guts need to.
And you guys, yeah, you guys found that because again, I mean, she was really thriving in the NICU. I mean, at that point, how much she had gained weight, every time you would send us updates, they were very positive.
Yeah, she was a little over 3 pounds at that point, and yeah, she was doing good. We were talking about starting to like feed on her own because up until then she had had, an OG tube, and she was beating down on her oxygen. We were talking about moving her to a less like high risk ward, talking about going home, all this stuff. And then it just kind of happened out of the blue, and it's really quick. Our hospital was pretty quick to catch it, and even so, you know,
Yeah,
it
it was
just it takes them so quickly.
yeah, it was exploratory, right? Because you guys weren't going in like saying, "Oh, this is like she has this." It was more of like an exploratory, like what's kind of going on here, and then that was the immediate diagnosis.
Yeah, so Remy's case is actually different. A lot of times, if they suspect neck on like an X-ray or whatever, they can treat the baby with antibiotics. And in her case, that wasn't an option because she actually had a little bit of a rupture in her bowels, which is what prompted us to do the exploratory surgery. And at that point, neck wasn't even something that was being discussed. She wasn't showing the classic, signs of it. Her levels were actually improving. And so, we thought that the surgery was just going in to repair that section of her gut. And, of course, that wasn't the case. She had neck, all over her bowels. I think the surgeon said it was like over 70% of her bowels. And in that case, like it's not even a conversation of quality of life at that point. There's just nothing that they could do. And I mean, your gut is so important to your entire body. And it's like, if it's a heart issue, there's like surgery options for that or like transplant options for that. And there's just nothing you can do, you know, for the gut. You're born with the one that you have. And um, yeah, if it's not functioning properly, there's just nothing that they could do. So at that point, we decided that we didn't want her to suffer any longer. So, um, we withdrew care and we spent the next like 24 hours with her.
Gina, you guys, yeah, I am just thank you so much for sharing this story. And I mean, gosh, your experience and everything that you've been through so transparently. I don't even know what to say because this is, this is you've had so much that has gone on from that moment until today too. Um, you
Like
guys are
no
amazing.
words. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
so brave to even come on and like share this. And we're so thankful because there's so many other people and families who I'm sure have, gone through something similar. And just you coming on to even share this, like we thank you so much for being that brave to even talk about it. Cause
Oh
I
my
mean,
gosh, thank you guys for having the platform. I mean, it really is like, yeah, like I said before, talking about it as therapy for me. It was that's what I looked for, while we were going through this really difficult pregnancy after Remy passed away. Like it really tests everything. Like it tests your faith, it tests your relationships, it makes you question everything about your life. And I was like, desperate to find somebody who had gone through something similar because in my personal life, I don't know anyone who has gone through, infant loss or child loss. I do have friends who have had, miscarriages, but um, never knew anyone who had experienced child loss. So I've met a lot of really incredible women and moms throughout this process, and like, I mean, I'm really grateful for social media because that's when I find like a lot of my mom friends too.
Right.
But yeah, I love talking about it. I love talking about Remy, and yeah,
She has tons of aunties. I see all of
she
her
does.
gifts all the time. And you and Garrett do a phenomenal job at continuing to just keep her in your day-to-day life. I mean, I see it all the time again through social media. You're across the country, so I don't know. But I mean, and all along, like through your pregnancy and then through the grieving of Remy's loss, I mean, you still had to work. Like I feel like you went back to work so fast. Like,
Yeah, I went back to work. So we're pretty lucky out here in California. Like the parental leaves are pretty good. But I took my 8 weeks off for my C-section, and I probably could have gotten more, but I just like didn't even ask. And I'd started a new job like back in October, and she was born in February. So um you feel that like anxiety too about like, oh my gosh, am I gonna get fired? Which you totally shouldn't. But it was anxiety that I put on myself.
Right. Well, I remember you texted me, you're like, I feel like I need to go in, but like I have to travel today for work. And I was like, go in right now. You are
Yeah,
absolutely, I just remember that. You just had so much pressure on you for other like all the external factors with everything else that you were going through. And with Remy again, I just like still just like look at you and Garrett in awe of the fact that you guys have just continued to walk forward and building your family and like Remy is always your first child. She is that. And you're still like, you know what? We're gonna keep going on this journey to try again.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we want to be parents more than anything. And I think having had that experience with Remy and like, we still are her parents, but we want like a living sibling for her more than anything. And so that definitely, yeah, has been pushing us forward despite all the obstacles, which we haven't even gotten a chance to talk about the IVF piece of
I
this yet.
know. So, I mean, and obviously you guys took your time to grieve and you're gonna grieve the rest of your life. And at what point did you say, okay, we want to jump into this again?
Yeah, so it was actually pretty fast just because I had the information of, my AMH being low. And I was really worried about what that meant for, our future. So Remy passed in April. And I think in July or August, I started researching other REs in this area, which in San Diego, we're really lucky to have, multiple options to choose from. And we found a clinic. They repeated all of my blood levels, and my AMH had dropped to zero point 0.4 at this point. So in the span of a little over a year, it had almost like halved. And now, like retroactively, like I know that a C-section can kind of like cause your ovaries to like get quiet for a little bit just because there's trauma around, that area. I haven't had my AMH repeated in like maybe 9 or 10 months. So I don't know what it's at. But yeah, AMH had dropped again. So at that point, we were like, okay, I've had not only just a C section, but a classical C section. They advise you to wait at least a year and a half, preferably over 2 to 3 years in between pregnancies
Oh,
with that type of C
wow.
section.
Oh, wow.
It's a long time.
That is a
Yeah.
very long time. Wow.
Especially in your
Yeah.
situation. Like you're like, wow.
Yeah. And you're just, I was like, it was like an obsession for me. Like I was like, I have to get pregnant. Like put a baby in me right now. Like
Yeah,
I don't even care. I just need to
yeah.
be pregnant. It was a coping mechanism, like a grief response for sure. Um, and so we decided that we would do IVF to bank embryos until, we were ready. Um, so we did our first round of IVF with that clinic, that second IVF clinic. And we only retrieved 4 eggs. And out of those four, three fertilized and two made it to day 6 blast. We did not PGT test at that clinic only because prices were like ridiculously high. Like they had I think it was like 7,000 for PGT testing, no matter how many embryos you had. And in our case, we were like, we could do 2 transfers and it would be less than $7,000. So
Right.
like, we'll just transfer these if we have to and figure it out from there. And then I kind of started doing a little bit more research around like the IVF clinics and found one that specializes in like what's called mini IVF. And it's supposed to be a little bit more gentle and especially with women with like low ovarian reserve where you don't necessarily need all that medication. It can be, a better option. So
What is it
that
called?
was mini IVF.
Oh, mini IVF. Okay.
Yeah, it's a cute name.
Yeah, it is a cute
Um,
name.
Yeah, so then we switched clinics because we didn't really have the best results at the IVF clinic that we originally went to. So now this is my third RE that I'm seeing. And the results from those two were like night and day. We did the mini IVF. It seemed to really work for my body. Again, we only retrieved 4 eggs, but all 4 fertilized and 3 made it to blast. And those 3 were PGT tested and they were all normal.
That's some crazy
Um,
That's
statistics there.
amazing.
yeah, yeah, we were really, really thrilled about that. So we tried a couple of more rounds at that clinic to try to bank a few more embryos just because with like my APS, and I didn't even know about my endometriosis at that point, but I just was like, let's just bank as many as possible because now we have the option of having more than one child if we want to, and I would really love that. So we tried to bank as many as possible. We got one more our next round. And I was doing these like basically back to back. So I think my body was just tired.
Yeah.
And then none the final round. So all in all, we did 4 rounds and we have 4 PGT tested embryos and then 2 untested
And
out
you're
of
bringing me
those.
back. And in your intro, said you had failed IVF transfers, but that's absolutely not the case. I just remember you did so much IVF that I'm like, surely she's transferred one. So yeah, okay. So you did 4 IVF, like egg retrievals.
We did 4 egg retrievals. Yeah.
Wow.
Girl.
And no transfers.
I know that now. I
Yeah.
remember now. I'm like, I remember she did IVF at like numerous clinics. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So we are done. We have closed the chapter of IVF. Fingers crossed, but I'm hoping that, out of like one of those embryos that we've banked, we'll get a live birth out of that. And then this next part is like endometriosis
Right.
diagnosis and like seeking out a reproductive and immunologist and all of that. So we thought we were ready to transfer back in like February after we had finally finished our last IVF cycle. And my RE said that she really wanted me to do the receptiva testing, which tests for like the BCL. I don't know if it's like a protein or like a marker or whatever that checks for inflammation that can be closely linked to endometriosis. And I remember I was a little brat. I like pushed her on it and I was like, I don't think I need this. Like I got pregnant pretty quickly with my daughter and
Right.
I don't have any like symptoms or anything like that. And it was out of pocket. I think it was like $700. And at that point we just had spent so much money that I was like, can we just try to save $700?
Right.
But she was like, no, I just really want to rule this out. Like I like hate to see a transfer fail for you guys. Like let's just rule this one thing out. Sure enough, it came back positive, like really positive. And um and she told me, she's like, I can't see anything on an ultrasound, but again, I'm not an endo specialist. So I highly encourage you to seek out, an endo specialist if you're interested in surgery. Um and Amanda, do you have endometriosis or is it just a
I
late birth
actually
diagnosis?
get that procedure done in like 2 weeks.
I
So
was,
Oh,
I know.
okay.
Yeah. And you two were kind of like, do I really
I
need
push
it?
back. I've been pushing back because I'm like, I don't want this. I just want to do my transfer.
Yeah.
We only have one left. So I'm like, I just want to do it. But so
Yeah.
we'll see.
Because at
I will
that
let you
point,
know.
yeah, you're just like so eager. Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally was the same way. And the options so my RE gave me the options and she said you can either have the surgery to remove the endometriosis. It's a laparoscopic surgery and your recovery time will probably be around 6 to 8 weeks afterwards. Like we cannot do any sort of transfer or even think about a transfer until after the 6 to 8 week mark. And when you're sitting there in that spot, you felt like you're so close to getting to transfer after like a year and a half, 2 years of IVF and a loss. It's just like that felt like excruciating to me. And then the other option that she gave us was the Lupron Depot. So that's like a down regulation, and it's a shot that I think there's different ways that you can take it, but my clinic gives one shot per month, and they recommend 2 to 3 months. And what this medication does is it essentially shuts down all the hormone production in your body. So it puts you into like a faux menopause. And what that does is just quiets down the hormones that feed endometriosis. And the idea is that when you're ready for transfer, you just have like a quiet system. And so we consider those options. And with my low ovarian reserve, it just felt really scary to me to shut down my hormone production because I was like, what if my body just doesn't recover? So
Right.
we opted to go with surgery. I found a really incredible surgeon out here in San Diego who specializes in endo, and she was able to get us in really quickly. So I had surgery at the end of April, and she found and removed stage 3 endo. I was in surgery for 3 hours.
Oh
Wow.
my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was silent and or I guess I thought it was silent endo, but I've kind of had like IBS type symptoms my entire life. And like I keep a really strict diet. I'm like, let me cut out cheese, like let me cut out gluten, all this stuff. But it turns out it was just freaking endo.
Isn't that what we hear
So
that?
interesting. Oh my gosh, now you're making me more nervous. I'm like, it's gonna go
No,
back.
but I feel like I hear that all the time with people that finally get diagnosed with endometriosis. I mean, the average diagnosis time is like 10 years. And then all of
Mhm.
the women say, I had no symptoms until I had it removed. Then I realized
Yeah.
all of my symptoms that I didn't think were related are gone.
It's
Yeah.
so interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my first period after the endo surgery was like so amazing. I think I don't think I like cramped at all, like no clotting, no heavy periods. And, you just don't realize that these things are like they become your normal. Like
Yeah.
for me, every time I had my period, like I suffered with like really bad like IBS type pain. And I just thought that that's what everyone went through. Because, you hear your girlfriends say, like, oh, like I'm cramping, I'm on my period. And you
Yeah.
just don't realize that like that level of pain that you're having is like probably not normal until it's just not there anymore.
Wow.
Wow. So that was in April. Oh gosh, what are we? We're early July, April, May, April this year, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
April of this year. So a couple months ago. So at that point, after the endo diagnosis, I just was like, okay, like I just feel like I need to like tie this up with a bow. Like I want to have all the specialists on my team. I want to go into this next transfer knowing we did everything that we absolutely can do. So I sought out a reproductive immunologist, which I know can be kind of like controversial in the OBGYN, like MFM world, but I just was like, whatever, like I have to do this for myself, for my peace of mind. So we're seeing somebody out here in California, doing everything virtually. They did a ton of blood work on me, and essentially, like I have, um, I guess just like an immune issue. Like I have like high cytokines, and they ran like my husband's blood and like mixed it with my blood and like did all of this testing.
Oh, that's cool.
Um,
That's why you and I have need to get on the phone together. I know you've been
yeah,
wanting to tell me all about this. That's very interesting that they add the partner, and then I love that they mix the blood because that's ultimately what's happening, right? When you get pregnant.
exactly. Yeah. And they essentially test to see if your body has a strong immune reaction to your husband or your partner's like
Interesting.
blood,
Right.
essentially. And I did have a low positive for that. And so they came up with a treatment protocol for me, which I'm on right now. And they recommend, doing blood work to make sure everything is good before going into a transfer.
So when
Um,
you do a transfer, will you do that with your reproductive immunologist? Is that like at that clinic, or they'll just monitor at the clinic that you were with your reproductive endocrinologist?
Yeah, they'll monitor with the RE. So luckily, my RE is really open to reproductive immunology. I think there's, some who might not be as open. But luckily she's open. So she and my immunologist have consulted already and come up with a transfer plan. It's like, you guys, it's like crazy. It's like on days 1 through 6, like take this. On days like 6 to whatever, take this. Like get an IVIG infusion, like 2 to 5 days before your transfer. I mean, it
Yeah.
seems like a
Incredible.
lot. And I was definitely like freaking out about it first. You just get like so overwhelmed that you're like, I don't want to do any of this. But now having like done some of these treatments, I mean, for us, it's like it's doable. It's not as bad as it seems at first glance.
Yeah, I know. That's the one thing. And I feel like if you've listened to the show for a long time, and Gina and Amanda, you've known me for a long time. I feel like I would do anything. And then when I hit the wall with reproductive immunology, I'm like, it just seems like you're just like swimming in a large, dark ocean, and there's just so much that comes at you. And so I think that's like a really scary area for a lot of women. And like, gosh, more power to you to just like keep moving
Going.
forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it absolutely can be so scary, and it's hard too because I don't think any reproductive immunologist accepts insurance. So you're having to do this
Oh
stuff
my
out
God.
of pocket, and that adds to like the burden and the pain and all of that. So
And all
Um,
for like hope, right? Like all just for the hope that this is gonna
yeah.
work. And okay, so when we first started this episode, we said you first got pregnant in 2022 with Remy, right?
Mhm.
And now we are in July of 2024.
Yeah.
Girl, do you
Yeah.
think you're gonna transfer this year?
Yeah. So our plan is to transfer. I'm not gonna like say the date because
Yeah,
I don't want to
yeah.
get my hopes up.
Yeah.
No.
Our
But
plan
sometime
is to transfer hopefully within the next like 3 or 4 months because my husband deploys actually in September.
Jina,
So
you
I would
just have the layers on layers.
oh my gosh.
Was he deployed at all during this time? Like from when
So
you
he was actually supposed to be deployed during my pregnancy, but when things kind of turned south, he was able to get, and I mean, like this never happens, but his command was able to change his deployment schedule for him. And he ended up not deploying. So this will be his first deployment after, like since having Remy and since the
Yeah.
pregnancy.
Wow.
So yeah, his work has been really supportive about it, but I mean, we don't want to, ideally, I wouldn't be doing a transfer without him home.
Right.
Um, and I had a relatively easy pregnancy with Remy, thankfully, but like that first trimester fatigue and like I couldn't even lift my arm to brush my teeth without getting tired. I'd be like, I need a
Right.
nap.
Right. Oh my gosh, you have shared probably like 7 episodes in one. And I feel like we could go down the rabbit hole of any of the topics. I mean, number one, just again, thank you. And I know we just keep harping on it, but I know a couple of our listeners right now that are in the NICU with like very preterm babies. And so I know your Instagram is private, but you're also super willing to talk. Is it private still? Are
I
you
don't know. I think I might have put it as public now.
so
I
you
think
could
it's public.
connect?
I'll make sure it is. Yeah, because I would love to connect with anyone
Yeah, and
who's
it's just
walking
at
that.
Gina.Maloney. Am I saying your last name right? Maloney.
Yes, it's Maloney. Let me check. I don't even know my own
We will
Instagram.
definitely tag it in the show notes, but you're probably just like one of the best people for NICU moms to talk to and going through those early stages. Lost moms, what else? Endo moms, diminished
Literally.
ovarian reserve moms, reproductive
Yeah,
immunology. I need to reach out to
I
you.
know. Right. Me too. I'm like, if I get these results back, I will be messaging you immediately.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. I'm praying that, everything works out how you want it to, Amanda. But
Thank
um, despite anything, I think the meaning is just what you make of it. And we're like so lucky. We're, I guess, in a time where like we have treatments for these things and we can continue to hold hope and, um, yeah, move forward.
Is there
You're
any
literally a superwoman.
You are. I mean, I always think that of
Seriously.
you every single day. And then when you reached out and you're like, I really want to like share on the show, I was like, you're incredible. And I know like you probably are like, no, I'm not. I'm just a person and this is what has happened. And I'm just
Yeah.
living and showing up every day. I just think that Amanda and I just like look up to you so much. And I'm sure the listeners listening do too. Is there anything you want to leave listeners with from anything that you've learned along the last several years?
Oh my gosh. How do I like condense it into one?
I know.
I think this whole journey has just made me such a more like open person. It's allowed me to be really the truest version of myself, and whether that's like establishing relationships or new friendships. And it's just, I mean, I'm sure many of us feel this way after becoming a parent, but it's like, who was I before? And there's so much more meaning to my life and to the world around me, like after this process. So I just, um, yeah, I'm thankful for Remy for having given me this gift of being her mom, and it's like truly just the honor of a lifetime. And yeah, thank you for allowing me to come on and share her story, our story. Um, yeah, so grateful for this platform.
Thank you.